You forgot someone's name at a party last week. Simple mistake, right? Everyone does it. But here's what nobody asks. Why that name? Why not another person's? And why did you call your partner by your ex's name yesterday? That particular slip, at that particular moment. Why can't you remember what you said during the argument with your mother, even though you remember everything she said? Why do you accidentally break things when you're angry, lose your keys when you don't want to go somewhere, arrive late to events you claim you wanted to attend? We say, it's just a slip of the tongue, or I wasn't thinking. But these aren't explanations, they're surrenders. The mistakes aren't random, they're precise. Your unconscious is speaking. The reason has nothing to do with accidents. It's about who's actually making the decisions. Here's the story we tell ourselves. We're in control. The conscious mind steers. We make choices. We decide things. We're the captain of our ship. When something goes wrong, when we forget, when we slip, when we do something we didn't mean to, it's a failure of attention, a glitch in the system. I forgot because I wasn't paying attention, we say. But wait, why weren't you paying attention? Because I was distracted. By what? By, I don't know, other things. Which things? And why didn't those other things make you forget something else? The explanation is circular. It explains nothing. What if forgetting isn't failure of memory but success of something else? Consider this pattern. You forget appointments you dread. Not all appointments, just the ones with the dentist, or your boss's performance review, or your ex's wedding. You lose items you resent. Your mother-in-law's gift, the book your friend keeps recommending, the gym membership card. You arrive late to events you don't want to attend. The baby shower you felt obligated to go to. The networking event that makes you anxious. The family dinner where everyone argues. Now, you might say these are just coincidences, random noise. But look at the distribution. If mistakes were truly random, they'd scatter evenly across all situations. They don't. They cluster. They cluster around specific people, specific obligations, specific sources of discomfort. Well, not exactly coincidences. More like purposeful. The mistake accomplishes something. You didn't show up, but you're not responsible. You forgot. The obligation is avoided, but your conscious innocence remains intact. The symptom does exactly what you claim you didn't want to do. Which brings us to the question, who wanted that? What if there's another mind inside your mind? Not a soul, not possession, not anything mystical. A system. Mental processes that operate without your awareness, pursuing goals you'd consciously deny. The unconscious. It's thinking, desiring, deciding. And you don't know it's there. You experience only the results. The forgotten name, the broken vase, the inexplicable. Attraction. The dream you can't make sense of. And it's not just influencing you from the margins. It's been running the show. I started treating patients with hysteria in Vienna in the 1880s. These were people, mostly women, with physical symptoms that had no physical cause. Paralyzed limbs with functioning nerves, blindness with healthy eyes, chronic pain with no injury. The medical establishment dismissed them as malingerers or attention seekers, but I noticed something. When these patients spoke freely about their lives, really spoke without censoring themselves, letting thoughts flow wherever they wanted, the symptoms would disappear. Not always permanently, but the relief was undeniable. Something about articulating certain thoughts released the symptom. And their dreams. I started analyzing them systematically. The dreams weren't random either. They contained disguised wishes. Consider this case. A woman dreams she's missed her train. The dream is vivid, distressing. She wakes anxious. On the surface, it looks like an anxiety dream about failure or missed opportunity. But when we trace her associations, something emerges. She hated where she was going. The trip was obligatory, unwanted. The dream fulfilled a wish, the wish to not go. But it couldn't express that wish directly, so it disguised it as anxiety about missing the train. Pattern across patients. Dreams distort, but they don't randomize. They hide specific, uncomfortable desires behind symbolic imagery. The mechanism becomes clear. The unconscious wants X. The conscious mind would be horrified by X. So there's a compromise. You get a dream where X happens, but disguised, transformed, made acceptable. The wish is fulfilled, but your conscious self doesn't have to acknowledge it. So easy. No, because if the unconscious wants it, why hide it at all? Why not just act directly? Here's the problem. Society trains you from childhood. Don't hit your brother, don't take what isn't yours, don't want what you shouldn't want. These aren't just external rules, they become internal. By adulthood, they're part of your mental architecture. You internalize an agent that punishes you for having forbidden desires, not with physical punishment, but with guilt, shame, anxiety. This internal judge is relentless. So now there's a conflict. The unconscious still wants forbidden things. It wants to be selfish, aggressive, sexual in ways your conscious values condemn. But another part of you, the internalized voice of society, parents, morality, punishes you for even having these wants. The result? Compromise formations everywhere. You can't say you hate your boss, so you forget the important meeting with him. You can't consciously admit your attraction to your friend's partner, so you develop a headache whenever they're near, keeping you away, protecting you from acting on it. You can't express anger at your aging parent for their decades of criticism, so you accidentally break the family heirloom they treasured. The action happens, but you're innocent. You didn't mean to. The symptom lets both sides win. The unconscious gets partial expression. You didn't go to the meeting, you stayed away from the attractive person, you destroyed the hated object. And the conscious mind stays innocent. It was an accident, you feel terrible about it, you'd never do such things intentionally. Both demands are satisfied. That's why symptoms persist. They're functional. But wait, how do we know this isn't just a story we're telling? A neat theory that can't be tested? Let me prove it to you. Pay attention to your mistakes for 1 week. Write them down, not just the mistakes themselves, but the context. Who was involved? What were you supposed to do? How did you feel about it before the accident? The pattern will emerge. Your mistakes cluster. They're not evenly distributed across your life. They concentrate around specific people, specific topics, specific obligations. You resent. I documented thousands of these slips over decades of practice. Slips of the tongue, forgotten names, misplaced objects, bungled actions. The precision is what reveals the mechanism. A patient means to say, "I'm glad you're here today," to someone they resent. Outcomes: "I'm glad you're gone today." Not a random substitution. The wrong word is always meaningful, never arbitrary. The mistake expresses the true feeling. If mistakes were random noise, neural misfiring, fatigue, distraction, they'd scatter evenly across all domains of life. They don't. And modern cognitive psychology has confirmed this. What we call errors are systematic, goal-directed. When you study language production failures statistically, they're not random. They reveal competing intentions. One intention is conscious, say the polite thing. Another is unconscious, tell the truth about what you feel. The unconscious one breaks through in the mistake. The implication is stark. Language. Production isn't a single-channel system where one unified you decides what to say. Multiple systems are operating, multiple intentions are competing, and the one that wins isn't always the one you'd consciously choose. But where do these unconscious desires come from? Before you can even speak, you're learning what to want. Your first attachments, your first frustrations, your first shames, these experiences don't just shape your preferences. They create templates, patterns of relating, patterns of desiring, patterns of defending yourself. Consider this trajectory. A child wants the mother's attention constantly, can't have it. Mother is busy, has other children, has her own life. The want persists, but the child learns this want is bad. It makes mother frustrated. It makes me feel needy and rejected. The want doesn't disappear. It can't, but it goes underground. The child learns to suppress it, to feel shame about it, to pretend independence. Years later, this person, now an adult, finds themselves attracted again and again to unavailable partners, people who are ambiguous, distant, inconsistently available. "I don't know why I keep choosing the wrong people," they say. "I consciously want a good relationship." And that's true. Consciously, they do. But the pattern serves an unconscious purpose. It maintains the familiar dynamic. It avoids the risk of actual intimacy, which would mean being vulnerable, being seen, possibly being rejected for real. And it proves the old belief, "I'm not deserving of consistent love." But I consciously want a good relationship. Yes, and that's the conflict. Both are true. The conscious mind wants connection. The unconscious protects against the vulnerability connection requires. Result: sabotage. Every time the relationship gets close, you pick a fight or withdraw or find a flaw that justifies leaving. Every relationship pattern that repeats despite conscious effort to change. That's the unconscious at work. Actually, that means your current mind is determined by a mind you don't remember having. Full circle to the opening. That name you forgot at the party? It belonged to someone who reminds you of someone else. The chain operates in milliseconds, entirely outside awareness. This person's face resembles someone from your past. That person is associated with an old feeling. That feeling is threatening. Forget the name. You're not conscious of any of this. You just experience the blank. Sorry, I'm terrible with names. The mechanism isn't limited to slips and dreams. It operates on life choices, career choices. You become a doctor, like your father, whom you resented for never being home. Why? To master the dynamic, to prove you can do it better, to finally get his approval even though he's dead. Or you avoid medicine entirely, go into art, the opposite of his rationality. Either way, determined by him. Your free choice is a reaction. Partner choices. You recreate your childhood emotional environment. If your parents were critical, you choose critical partners. Not because you consciously enjoy criticism, you hate it, but familiar equals safe, even when familiar equals painful. Unfamiliar equals dangerous, even when unfamiliar equals healthy. The evidence accumulates in the therapy session. Patient swears they're over the childhood issue. I've dealt with that. I've moved on. Then, within the same session, they prove otherwise through a slip, through an emotional reaction, through a behavior pattern they don't recognize. The unconscious reveals what the conscious mind denies. What does knowing yourself actually mean? You know your rationalizations. You narrate after the fact. You construct explanations for why you did what you did. But the real reasons, hidden. You experience yourself as transparent, as having direct access to your own motivations. Let us be honest, you don't. You're interpreting yourself the same way you'd interpret someone else by observing behavior and guessing at causes. Often you're wrong about yourself. The question this raises, can you ever access it? There's a technique. Free association. You say whatever comes to mind without filtering, without judging, without censoring for logic or appropriateness or social acceptability. Just speak. The conscious censor operates linearly. It guards the direct path between unconscious desire and conscious expression. But thoughts don't only move in straight lines. They associate sideways through resemblance, through sound, through emotional tone. Follow those associations and they lead around the censor into the unconscious territory. Start with a dream about a house. Free associate. House makes you think of your childhood home, which makes you think of your father, which makes you think of his anger, which makes you think of a specific memory you'd forgotten, which reveals a wish you didn't know you had. The chain leads somewhere. Things that appear distant on the surface turn out to be adjacent in the unconscious structure. What emerges isn't random. Themes repeat. Emotions cluster. The same conflicts appear under different symbolic disguises. You begin to see the pattern, the template you've been following without knowing it. And resistance is itself a signal. When the patient suddenly can't think of anything, or changes the subject abruptly, or starts intellectualizing instead of feeling, that means you're close to something important. The censor is fighting back. The unconscious isn't completely sealed. It leaks constantly, through slips, through dreams, through irrational fears, through inexplicable attractions, through symptoms you can't explain. You just have to learn to read the language of metaphor, of displacement, of condensation, where one thing stands for another, where the part represents the whole, where the feeling attached to one memory migrates to a different one. You think you're making choices. But which you? The conscious self experiences itself as command center. I'm steering this ship, but consciousness is more like a press secretary. It explains decisions that were made elsewhere by processes it doesn't have access to. It constructs narratives after the fact. It rationalizes. It believes its own stories. This isn't hopeless. Understanding the unconscious doesn't free you from it. You can't make the unconscious fully conscious. That's impossible. But it narrows its control. Recognition breaks automaticity. Once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. I'm doing it again becomes a moment of choice, even if small. The automaticity loses some of its power. Analysis doesn't cure you, doesn't eliminate the unconscious, doesn't make you fully rational or fully self-aware. I never promised that. I promised less suffering from invisible forces. I promised you'd stop repeating the same painful patterns quite so blindly. The work widens the beam of awareness. More of your motivations become visible. Not all, never all, but more. Let us be honest about this. By the 1920s, even I was shocked by what my own self-analysis revealed. The death drive, the compulsion towards self-destruction, toward returning to an inorganic state. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was there in my own dreams, my own associations, my own behaviours. Even the analyst discovers his own unconscious is darker, stranger than he'd imagined. This isn't pathology. This is the human condition. Everyone's mind is an iceberg. The conscious tip, what you experience as you, is tiny compared to what lies beneath. The vast unconscious depth, pursuing its own goals, thinking thoughts you'll never directly access. That name you forgot at the party? Now you know, it wasn't forgotten. It was avoided. 4 reasons. The name connected to something which connected to something else, which connected to a feeling your unconscious judged too threatening to allow into. Awareness. So it blocked the retrieval. Mission accomplished. Every blank in your memory, every I don't know why I did that. Every moment where you act against your stated intentions, those aren't gaps. They're redactions. Your unconscious is editing your experience in real time. Protecting you from desires and truths it has judged too dangerous for you to consciously acknowledge. So, what else have you been hiding from yourself? What else is your unconscious protecting you from or condemning you to repeat? That's the work. I'll stop here. But the unconscious won't.